there's many CSS properties that can be specified for all the elements of your website. So I encourage you to go on W3 Schools and then look at the CSS tab. And if you click on it, it has an introduction. This kind of says a lot of the things that I've said. It explains the syntax. So here we have our selector, our property, values for properties. You can see it has these like live try it yourself little editors, so you can change things live and see how it affects stuff. And then it has it has a list of the different it should have a list of, I guess this is them. So it has a list of all the different things you can do. It tells you how to write comments. This is also a way to write comments. Colors, how to set backgrounds. So it gives you like all the options. So I highly recommend looking at this so that you can find tags. But for the moment, so for the next section of class, I would like to talk about the cascading part of the style sheet. So how does this propagate, and like why do certain selectors get priority and others do not? So maybe we can find a diagram of inheritance in CSS selector. That looks pretty good. Maybe there's one with specific stuff. No, we'll just use this one. Okay, so here you can see the tags that make up a typical website. In fact, this perfectly describes the website we made. We have head and title tag, we have an H1, we have a paragraph tag. We don't have a B tag, but we do have a tag, we have our links, image tags, etc. So this is the order in which elements will be affected in the given tags, the semantic given HTML tags. And they're written out as body, paragraph, image, a tag, etc. So they're written out normally here with their name, and that's it. But what if we want to have a special tag? So let's say that I have two paragraphs. So I have this paragraph, and then I have a second paragraph. So maybe I'm going to write about red light. Red light is the least powerful light wavelength in the visible spectrum. The lasers above vibrate at, I think, 650 nanometers. So the wavelength of that light is 650 nanometers per crest, between crests, which is very tiny, less than a pixel. Okay, so that's my second paragraph. And I want it to look different than my first paragraph. So I might give this paragraph what's called an ID. And it's an attribute that we can give in HTML. And I'm going to say definition. Definition P. So this is my, capital P. So this is a special kind of paragraph I'm going to have recurring through my website where I define things, and I want it to look different whenever it shows up. So now I've given it a specific selector in the form of this ID, and now I can call it in the CSS and alter its appearance. So I'm going, and the way that I do that is with a hash sign that you're probably familiar with from other places, and I'm going to add that name that I just gave to it. So the ID of that paragraph is definition P, and you can see it's blue, and it's also blue here, so that's a good indication that things went well. And I'm going to say that I want it to, all the text in it to be bold. Anytime I define something, I want it to be bold. So let's look up CSS text bold property, font weight. And the way that we would write that is font weight bold. Great. I'll copy that, and now all of my paragraphs that are definitions are going to have this look. And I'll show you what that means. So let's look at the website. Here's my font, my monospace font, but this one is bold. So that means that if I have another paragraph that's normal, I can say, I also want to define blue light, for example. And it doesn't even have to be, the ID is, maybe doesn't even have to be tied to a paragraph. Let's see. No, I don't think so, because we can't have two things that are the same name. Okay, so it does have to have the same, it has to be in the same type of naming. So I also want to define blue light. And here I can make another one. Blue light travels at a wavelength, and I don't remember the wavelength. It looks like it says 495 nanometers, or 470. Okay. Great. So I'm going to save that. And you see that I have the same effect without having to write that information twice. So it gives me the same bolding, because from now on, everything that I label a definition is going to be rendered this way. So that's a ID. And
Can
then,
you show how
yes.
you wrote it in the style section?
So in the style section, it's written like this with a hash. So my ID is, yeah, it's defined with a hash. So the HTML elements that are like your basic HTML semantic elements, the ones that are not defined by you, you don't have to write anything, and they show up in red in Atom. And then for the IDs, you write a hash, and they show up in blue. And then finally, we have classes. So it goes, semantic elements are like the top priority. The IDs are second, and then classes are the final priority. So here we can make a little tag, and the non-semantic tag of choice is called a div, which just means division. So we can put this in a div, this red light text, and it's not going to change anything in its appearance. It's just a way to mark up a piece of text so that we can then alter it later. So you can see, well, it made me go to the next line, and I'll explain that next, but it didn't do anything to it yet. So I have this div, it says red light, so now I can give it a class. So I can say div class equals red. And I'm just going to use this for everything that I want to be red. Whether it's inside a paragraph, whether it's an H2, like maybe I just want to make random things be red, so I'm going to put a div around them and make them red. So I will write that a class is written in CSS with a dot, and then we're going to call it by its name, and then we're going to say color red. So everything that is part of this red class is going to be red now. And I can make something else red as well, like this. I think it's going to make it be on another line too, so we'll fix that shortly. Okay, so now that is red in my code. I have two places where I did this. There's the other spot, and let's see it in action. So here's some red ones that I made, and here's another bit about red light. Okay, so this jumping of going to the next line thing is kind of annoying though, but I'm glad it happened because that is something that I want to bring up. And this refers to the kind of kind of way in which we render our CSS elements, and that is inline or block. So because we want to affect everything on our page, I'm going to go into the body tag since it holds everything else. And then if I say display inline, that means it's going to display everything in the line. So, and I mentioned this in the video as well. So I just hit Command S to save. And if we put this in Firefox, oh man, it still did that. Why? Why on earth? So it did make this margin go away when I wrote that, but the div still made the text jump to the next line. Okay, so this is where I'm going to do a little bit of research, and I think my suspicion is that just using this div always makes things go to the next line. So I'm going to say does div always break text to lines? Maybe I'm not phrasing this correctly, but this will immediately, it looks like there's people having similar issues. HTML wrap texts, how to prevent it from breaking into the next line. Okay, so this is saying maybe I want to use a span tag instead, because it's an inline level element, so it's an element that stays inline. I'm like, okay, great. I will use the span tag. Because what I really want to do is highlight something. I want to mark something up without altering it and give it a little highlight. So Let's see if this solves our problem. And it did. Amazing. So that's kind of a good demonstration of the flow that I go through when I'm troubleshooting and when I'm writing HTML. I'm like, okay, what can I use instead? How can I find different ways of saying this, or find the definition that I'm looking for? Because chances are, if you want to do something, it's out there. Just look it up. And I also, when I did this inline display, I got rid of my margin, which is kind of cool. But let's see how display block changes the way our website looks. So I can just reload. Okay, so in this case, it didn't radically change it because the elements we're using already make things go to the next line. So the paragraph element automatically makes things after it go to the next line. The H1 element and the H2 element automatically makes things go after them to the next line. So let's take a look in W3 schools, inline and block. They should have a nice tutorial that you can, not tutorial, but a live example that you can play with. So try it yourself. Okay. So here we have the same CSS style for three different CSS styles on the same HTML code. So you see it has the same lorem ipsum, the same garbly Latin, pseudo-Latin text, the same word highlighted with this span, and the same H2 title for every block of HTML code. But the CSS is different for all three of them, and I'm going to remove this inline block one because it might be a little confusing for the moment. And we'll just look at the differences between inline and block. So you can see in the inline one, I have to move the window with the chat window. Okay, so you can see in the inline one, we have our text, and then we have the next text, and it is highlighted, and it's all staying in one line. And then here, every time we have a different element, it jumps to the next line. So we have our, and I have to move the chat window again. We have our div here. Then there's this span that has aliquam in it, and that is considered its own element now because of the block property. So then it goes to the next line, and then after that there's another span. So then that's going to the next line, and then we continue on with our div. So it's a different way of organizing all of your bits as you're working on making a website. So this is my block layout here. Okay, so those are, I think, everything you need to know for this week. But finally, I want to finish off the work that I did today by uploading it back to CyberDuck, right? Because everything that I did so far, I did locally. So while I might be seeing this, it says that here on the file users, that's the address. So if I go to, I'll copy this for you before I leave this page. If I go to my webpage, i6 Sims. So if I go here and I click on HTML, none of those changes have taken hold, right? Because I haven't uploaded it yet. This is what I have locally, and this is what I have live. So I'm going to re-upload my index. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite it. Yes, I do. So let's take a look at what I have now. Okay, so I see some changes have been made, but not others. And that's because I made a whole new file, right? I made that external style sheet, this main.css, but I never uploaded it. So how can it know that it needs to use that? So now I'll add this as well. It should just add it. And I'll reload, and huzzah! Okay, so now we've synchronized. Our versions are synchronized. The live version and my local version are both. Okay.